Hello viewers, today let us explore the life of an English householder in early 19th century Calcutta. In this paper I will be primarily referring to 4 books. Most of the quotations are taken from these 4 books. Paramita Chaudhuri's Freedom and Beefsticks, William Dalrymple's Begums, Thugs and Englishmen, Thankappan's Calcutta in the 19th century, and finally Fanny Parkes' Wanderings of a Pilgrim in Search of the Picturesque. A memoir charts the personal experiences of the writer and is therefore shaped partially by his feelings. And this emotive and subjective rendering of the past infuses pulsations of life in the dry bones of history. It holds up a mirror to a way of life, and despite being episodic, fragmentary and incomplete, it fills up the gaps present in the official past as projected by the archival chronological data. In this paper, an attempt has been made to reconstruct a picture of the domestic life of an English family in the early 19th century Calcutta through the memoirs of Fanny Parkes, Lieutenant R.G. Wallace, Bishop Harper, William Huggins and Mrs. Fenton. These memoirs roughly cover the period spanning from 1822 to 1828. Mrs. Parkes arrived in Calcutta, the city of palaces as it was called, in 1822. And set up her household in a rented house in Chaurangi. She writes, "The rent of unfurnished houses in Chaurangi is very high. We gave rupees 325 a month for ours. The larger ones are from rupees 400 to 500 per month." She found the style of an English house entirely different from that of a house in England. While Indian matting kept the floor cool during the summer months, during the winter months, carpets from Persia and Mirzapur adorned the Indian houses. As we go through these descriptions, we need to remember that the lady in focus was a Britisher visiting India during the Raj, and therefore despite being the wife of a junior English official, she was one of the privileged few in Calcutta, and we are viewing that slice of Calcutta life of which she was a partaker. We learn from her memoir that houses in Chaurangi had large, lofty, interconnected rooms with folding doors, pankhas and French furniture. Once again, I quote from a memoir. "The most beautiful French furniture was to be bought in Calcutta of M.D. Bast, at whose shop marble tables, fine mirrors and luxurious couches were in abundance. Very excellent furniture was also to be had at European shops made by native workmen under the superintendence of European cabinet and furniture makers. And furniture of an inferior description could be found in the native bazaars." And then she moves on to the description of the pankha. "It is a monstrous fan," she writes, "a wooden frame covered with cloth, some 10, 20, 30 or more feet long, suspended from the ceiling of a room and moved to and fro by a man outside by means of rope and pulley. And a hole in the wall through which the rope passes. The invention is a native one. They are the greatest luxuries and are also handsome, some being painted and gilt. The ropes covered with silk and so shaped or scooped as to admit their vibratory motion without touching the chandeliers, suspended in the same line with the pankha, and when at rest occupying the space scooped out. On December 1, 1825, Mrs. Parkes notes their hiring of an apartment at Middleton Road, Chaurangi. The reason of this shifting being a genuine dislike of their earlier residence due to the presence of tanks and native huts in the neighborhood. This three-storied house with verandas in each story, the bedrooms on the second floor, and a monthly rent of rupees 325 gifted Mrs. Parkes with a unique experience. Let's read from her memoir. The deep fogs in Calcutta rise thick and heavy, as high as the first floor. From the veranda of the second, you may look down on the white fog below your feet, whilst the stars are bright above and the atmosphere clear around you. The spotted deer play about the compound, and the mouse deer runs about my dressing room doing infinite mischief. This discrimination between the mansions of the European settlers and the mud huts of the poor natives in Calcutta of 1824 is well depicted by William Huggins in his Sketches in India, a book written in the form of letters. In letter number 2, he writes about the noble buildings of Calcutta, in the context of which he describes the commodious houses that belong to the Europeans and some rich babus of Bengal, and how they differed from the dwellings of the poor natives. Mrs. Parkes writes of the houses stuccoed from outside and thereby having the appearance of being built of stone. Huggins echoes her words when he describes the cut stone appearance of a gentleman's house in Calcutta. This large square building with a flat roof colonnade that encloses a veranda, windows with green Venetians, has the appearance of an English castle, or rather the hotel of a rich Parisian, enclosed by a wall or a metal railing. That is what Huggins writes. There is soon a radical shift of scene when he moves beyond the mansions into the areas inhabited by the natives. He writes, "No city except Calcutta deserves to be called a mass of misery and magnificence more justly. After leaving the grand streets and approaching the abodes of the native population, a very different spectacle meets the eye. Huts built of mud or bamboo and grass, low, filthy, and crowded with people, constitute the habitations of poor natives. The population that resides within a square of these huts is very great and would create surprise in anyone who has not witnessed such a scene. During the monsoon fires, frequent frequently occur among these huts and endanger the stately dwellings of their English neighbours. Some rich natives dwell in elegant mansions built after the English style. Others, inferior to them, erect large houses which in their internal construction resemble the old abbeys or castles we read of in romances. However, the Europeans often had to get used to certain Indian ways of living, much to their discomfort. While Mrs. Parkes mentions the innumerable doors and windows in the house she had rented in Chaurangi during her stay in Calcutta, Mrs. Fenton, in her memoir, describes how ill at ease she felt when she spent a night at the residence of Mrs. Clayland on her arrival at the City of Palaces. I quote from her memoir. I think one of the first impressions on the mind of the English stranger is the utter want of comfort exhibited in an Indian sleeping apartment. Your idea of a bedroom, and that was mine also, is that of a retirement, a sanctuary where none can and will intrude. Ye powers, thought I, who could sleep in a room where 4 doors and 4 windows all stand open? My next determination was, they shall be shut, and I began to go round the room with this resolve, but found my labour in vain, as all were unblessed with either lock or bolt, indicating too plainly that Indian doors were not supposed to be shut. My bed stood in the middle of the floor without curtains, with pillows as hard as the table and about the size of a pin cushion. There was only one chair in the room, and I looked in vain for some place to put my clothes or a basin of water to wash. Much later, in her memoir, when she writes about society in Calcutta, she seems to be plagued by homesickness. There is a misty dampness in the air, partly from all the doors and windows lying open, which sometimes occasions a regretful thought on the curtained window and blazing fire of England. The mosquitoes, bugs, and rats of Calcutta were never welcome in the European residences, but they just refused to budge. Mrs. Parkes doesn't mince words while voicing her grievances against the mosquitoes and other insects of the city. I quote from a memoir. The greatest annoyance is the mosquitoes' bites. It is almost impossible not to scratch them, which causes them to inflame, and they are then often very difficult to cure. They are to me much worse than the heat itself. My irritable constitution cannot endure them. The insects are of monstrous growth. Such spiders and the small lizards are numerous on the walls of the rooms, darting out from behind the pictures, etc. Curtains are not used in Calcutta. They would harbour mosquitoes, scorpions and lizards. Well, if they were at all used, that's what she means here. She mentions the theft of silver covers used to put over tumblers and wine glasses to keep out flies. And later in her journal we learn rats of enormous sizes overrun the ground floor of the house, and the shocking detail of how the the fingers and feet of men asleep on the floor were bitten by these rodents. She also narrates the horrific incident of a bandicoot rat attacking an infant in the month of May 1825. I quote, "The other evening, I was with my beautiful and charming friend, Mrs. F, name not mentioned. She had put her infant on a mat where it was quietly sleeping in the room where we were sitting. The evening darkened. A sharp cry from the child startled us. A bandicoot rat had bitten one of its little feet." Mrs. Fenton describes the mosquitoes as wild insects that settle on her when she forgets to arrange the mosquito curtains before falling asleep at Mrs. Clayland's residence. Later in the memoir, she explains why it is almost impossible to enjoy a peaceful slumber in Calcutta even after a tiring day. I quote, "It is quite impossible to give you any idea of the fearful cries of the jackals who frequently come to your veranda. They do not merely howl, but they set up a lengthened, varying cry so like a human creature in intense agony. I defy you to sleep under such painful associations. In addition to these tormentors outside, within you have muskrats, lizards, mosquitoes, cockroaches and bugs, so that you know not on which side to prepare your defense." Servants played a very important role in easing out the discomforts in the domestic sphere and also in being sources of annoyance to the English families of the early 19th century, Calcutta. Mrs. Parkes in her memoir gives us a list of 57 servants needed to run the domestic affairs of a private family. The list comprises a khansama or head man, generally a Muslim who purchases provisions, makes confectionery and superintends the table, an abdar or water cooler, the head khidmatgar in charge of the plate chest, a second khidmatgar who waits at the table, a bawarchi or cook, a maid bawarchi, a mashalchi to serve as a dishwasher and torchbearer, a dhobi or washerman, an istriwala appointed for ironing clothes, a tailor, a second tailor, a lady's maid or aya, an underwoman, a sweeper who is also supposed to take care of the dogs, a sardar bearer, a Hindu servant is the head of the bearers and also the keeper of the master's wardrobe with the keys carried in his kamarband. What is a kamarband? Folds of cloth around his waist. A valet who also attends to the lamps, the 6 pankha pullers, also supposed to dust the furniture, a cowherd, a shepherd, a murgiwala to take care of the fowls, a gardener and his mate, a coolie, a gram grinder, a coachman, 8 grooms, 8 grass cutters, a water carrier and his mate, 2 carpenters, 2 coolies to take care of the horses, 2 watchmen, a gatekeeper and finally 2 chaprasis or running footmen to carry notes. The family had to spend a sum of rupees 290 per month to retain this amazing retinue. It is clear that their wages were not high, but the number of servants to run an establishment in India left a newly arrived Englishman agape. However, the number could in no way be reduced. It is impossible to do with a few servants. You must have many. Their customs and prejudices are inviolable. A servant will do such and such things and nothing more. They are great plagues, much more troublesome than English servants. The Sarkar was a man of extreme importance in the household of Mrs. Parkes. He was in charge of the purchases of the family and hence had ample opportunity of reaping profit by rightfully taking dasturi, an absolute tax which was a percentage on all that he purchased, as was the practice. It would generally be 2 annas. 1 anna is equal to 1/16 of a rupee in the rupee. The boxwallas, people who brought articles for sale in boxes, had to pay dasturi to the darwan. If the sahib purchased something, the sardar bearer would ask for his share, and if the purchaser turned out to be the main sahib, the ayah would turn out to be the lucky one. However, the ultimate victim in this chain would always be the purchaser, for the boxwala would see to it that all these dasturis were included in the final price of the article. If, however, the sarkar happened to be the purchaser, the chain would vanish and the entire percentage would become his rightful property. He stood at the head of the chain of servants, was flattered by those below him, for their reputation depended on his recommendations. He himself was no less of a sycophant, as was evident in the kind of language he used in his dealings with his English masters. We find in the memoir, this man's language was a strong specimen of English hyperbole. One day he said to me, "You are my mother and my father and my God." With great disgust I reproved him severely for using such terms, and when he explained, "You are my protector and my support, therefore you are to me as my God." Bishop Harbour was amused by this kind of language the English servants used, and initially it was difficult for him to believe that slavery did not exist in India. Though no slavery legally exists in the British territories at the moment, he writes, yet the terms and gestures used by servants to their superiors all imply that such distinction was at no distant date very uncommon. "I am thy slave hath no knowledge," are continually used as expressions of submission and of ignorance. In general, however, I do not think that Bengali servants are more submissive or respectful to their masters than those of Europe. The habit of appearing in bare feet in the house, the manner of addressing their superiors by joining their hands in the attitude of prayer, at first gave them such an appearance, but these are in fact nothing more than taking off the hat or bowing in England, and the person who acts thus is as likely to speak saucily or neglect our orders as any English footman or groom. Mrs. Parkes seems particularly disturbed by the excessive idleness of the natives, and she makes a specific mention of her ayah, who would dress her, go home for dinner, and then enjoy a relaxing slumber in one corner of her room for the rest of the day. The bearers also do nothing but eat and sleep when they are not pulling the pankhas, she writes. Mrs. Fenton had no better opinion of the Indian ayah. They try to make it appear they are indispensable to your comfort and fall on 1,000 contrivances to keep always in your way and a perpetual watch on all you do. They attend you with most disgusting servility. If they have any end to attain, then perhaps decamp with whatever they can strip you of. She too, like Mrs. Parkes, is disgusted by the sight of her ayah sleeping on the floor. I looked into the next room where my ayah lay on the floor, on which was strewn many articles of a lady's dress. She seemed like a dog keeping watch on them. We gathered from Mrs. Parkes that except the tailor, none of the servants could speak English. And the Mem Sahib had to learn Hindustani to communicate with them. Bishop Harbour does not seem quite pleased with the standards of cleanliness maintained by the servants. Their masters generally supplied them with turbans and girdles of some specific color and lace. The ordinary Englishman's servant dressed in cotton shirts, trousers or kaftan of the country. He, however, does mention the handsome scarlet and gold kaftans worn by the servants of the Governor General. Mrs. Fenton particularly mentions the offensive smell of the oil that forms a part of toilet of the disgustingly servile and insatiably curious ayahs. The Sarkar, an obvious exception by caste, a Hindu, as was evident from the white dot that he wore between his eyes and the opening of the vest on the right side, was very particular about his dress. Mrs. Parkes gives us a detailed description of the apparel of the Sarkars. She writes, "They dress themselves with utmost care and most scrupulous neatness in white muslin, and the turban often consists of 21 yards of fine Indian muslin by 14 inches in breadth and most carefully folded and arranged in small plaits. His reed pen is behind his ear and the roll of paper in his hand is in readiness for the order of the Sahib. The shoes are of common leather. Sometimes they wear them most elaborately embroidered in gold and silver thread and colored beads. All men in India wear moustaches. They look on the bare faces of the English with amazement and contempt." While the servants had a crucial role to play in the Christmas celebrations, decorating gateways with garlands, serving flower-decked trays of fruits, cakes and sweetmeats to their masters and requesting bakshish in return, there was also a breach of trust in the master-servant relationship, in a conviction prevalent among the English residents that next to the Chinese, the people of India are the most dexterous thieves in the world. Porters, watchmen and high walls around the compound were not enough to prevent minor thefts and robberies. I quote from a memoir, "We could not prove the theft, but had reason to believe that it was perpetrated by a head table servant, Khansama, whom we had discharged, connived at by the Darwal and the Chaukidars." Despite all their complaints against the living conditions in Calcutta, the Europeans enjoyed luxuries that they perhaps could not even dream of in their homeland. Hence, many preferred to prolong their stay in India and almost resented going back home. Lieutenant R.G. Wallace, in his memoir, presents a detailed account of the nostalgic recollection of an Englishman of the ease and splendor that characterized his life in Calcutta. His comfortable palanquin, into which he used to carelessly throw himself and loll at ease with a book while paying visits or attending business, a silken chhata or umbrella shading him from glare, and the tinkling bells and silver sticks running before to proclaim his consequence, often recur to his mind. And the perfume of his hookah or the Hindu machine for smoking is not forgotten. The fumes of this scented tobacco are considered even by ladies as very agreeable, so that it is quite fashionable in India to smoke the hookah. Allusion has been before made to the delicacies of the table, and in no country in the world can wines be made more delightfully cool than in India by a process of refrigeration with saltpeter, at which the native servants called abdars or water coolers are very expert. Mrs. Fenton's comment regarding the dependence of an English lady on ayahs smacks of cynicism. She writes, "However, to every lady I have met but myself, these women are necessary. I am satisfied it is in many cases from ostentation, for I see those depend most on them whose early life was spent in menial offices at home, and whom nature never designed for anything higher. One of them said in my hearing the other day, she could not put her own stocking. I had good reason to know she seldom had to wear before she was sent to India." So Mrs. Parkes also focuses on the privileges of an Englishman living in Calcutta and draws a distinct line of discrimination between the regal lifestyle in Calcutta and a mediocre way living back at home. I quote, "So few of the gentry in England can afford to keep riding horses for their wives and daughters that I was surprised on my arrival in Calcutta to see almost every lady on horseback, and that not hired hacks but on their own good steeds." So they all owned horses. She almost echoes Mrs. Fenton when she describes the abundance of servants in English households. I quote, "To a person fresh from England, the number of servants attending at table is remarkable. We only had a small party of 8 to dinner yesterday, including ourselves. 23 servants were in attendance. Each gentleman takes his own servant or servants in number 1 to 6, and each lady her attendant or attendants as it pleases her fancy." And like Mrs. Fenton, she clearly refuses to be identified with others of her kind. You in India, imagine a lady in India has nothing to do For myself, I superintend the household and find it difficult at times to write even letters. There is so much to which it is necessary to attend. That these memoirs do project an authentic image of a luxurious English lifestyle is well validated by the way the natives elites, including the English educated ones, were tempted to follow the English ways of living. The parodies and the satires written by the late 19th century Bengali intellectuals focus on the paraphernalia, affectations and the exhibitionism as integral elements of English everyday life, well imitated by the anglicized Bengali babus of Calcutta. Paramita Chaudhuri, in her book on the colonial Calcutta culture, Freedom and Beef Steaks, quotes from Kaliprashanna Sinho's Hutum Pachar Naksha and from an essay written by Bankim Chandra, The Confession of a Young Bengal, included in Bankim Rachanabali Volume 3, Sahitya Sangsad publication 1998. To illustrate the effect of the Western influence on traditional Bengali households, Bankim Chandra in his essay describes the decor of a drawing room belonging to a typical English educated babu, referring specifically to the radical students of De Rosio at the Hindu College between 1826 and 1831. Chairs, tables, pankhas, seldom meant to be pulled, American clocks, glassware of variegated hues, pictures for which the illustrated London news is liberally laid under contribution, kerosene lamps, bookshelves filled with Reynolds Mysteries, Tom Paine's Age of Reason and the complete poetical works of Lord Byron, English musical boxes compose the fashionable furniture of the sitting rooms of young Bengal. Hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.